having lived my whole life in the east and northeastern part of the United States, over the years I've regularly run into people who were leaving where I was from to go to LA. And generally speaking, they would say something like this. They would say, I'm going to LA to follow my dreams. I'm going to LA to discover myself. And then I got here to the conference, and actually one of the speakers, Tim Chaddock, yesterday, I think it was talking a little bit about the culture of LA, and he said that often when people come to Los Angeles and what did you come here for? They tell him, I've come to follow my dream, I've come to find myself, I've come to establish my identity. And then I thought, wait a minute, isn't this the city where they made the film that all the 5 to 10-year-old girls in the whole world are singing the theme song of? Isn't this the place that came up with the song, It's Time to See What I Can Do, to test the limits and break through, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. You gotta let it go. You can't hold it back anymore. Don't be the good girl that they want you to be. You gotta be yourself. And so Elsa left to go to Los Angeles. No, that's right, she's from Los Angeles. Now, you see, that approach to identity that's sung in that song, but that approach to identity, and LA is the epicenter of it, is the dominant cultural, our modern culture's dominant way of telling you how you find your identity. I'm here tonight to say that, though I'll say a couple of words of appreciation, that Christianity does not just give you a new identity, it gives you a radically different way of forming an identity. It gives you a unique, liberating, and infinitely better identity than the one that the culture is actually imposing on you right now. And so I'd like to talk to you tonight about a new identity, and actually a new kind of identity that you find in Jesus Christ. And it's, like I said, it's not only unique, but it is liberating and infinitely better than the believe it or not, I'm going to try to show you, the identity that the culture is pressing upon you under the name of helping you find yourself. I'll just read briefly from John chapter 10, just a few verses. I'm not going to so much expound these verses tonight as refer to some themes in them that'll help me make my case to you about identity. John chapter 10, verses 1 to 3 and 14 to 15. This is Jesus' words. Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Now, 3 things I'd just like to draw out of that passage that help us understand the different ways that identity is formed. The passage just tells us 3 simple things: that we're sheep, that we need to be named, and that we need to be redeemed by the great shepherd himself. Now, let's start with this idea, we're sheep. You know, it's an image of, Jesus is being likened to the shepherd, but the image here is human beings are sheep. And this is one of the main metaphors in the Bible for human beings, is we're sheep. Now, if you feel warm and toasty when you hear, the Lord is my shepherd, if you feel warm and toasty, I want you to just stop it. Because when the Bible calls us sheep, that's an insult. That's not a nice thing. It's not warm and toasty. I can say without fear of contradiction that sheep, as the animals, the sheep, are the most non-self-sufficient animals on the face of the earth. What I've been told by people who know sheep is this. One is sheep will, unless you go get them food, they will starve. They have no way of hunting or finding food. Secondly, even if you put food in front of them, you got to watch them because they don't always recognize the right thing. They very often eat toxic things. Just say, oh, I didn't know that. So anyway, they can't get the food. They can't recognize good food. And if they're away from home, they can't find their way home. They're completely non-self-sufficient in every way. And here we're told even that their shepherd not only leads them and takes them and feeds them and all that, but he names them, that even their very identity is given to them by the shepherd. Now, our culture completely and thoroughly and angrily rejects that account of human nature. It completely and thoroughly rejects that idea that human beings are not self-sufficient, and especially is offended by the idea that we need someone else to name us and give us an identity. Now, to go into why our modern culture believes the way it does, every single culture has a way of identity formation. An identity is at least two things: your self-understanding and your self-regard. Your self-understanding is, what are you really about? What is the core you that is always true of you, regardless of the year, regardless of the role? In other words, what is you here and you here? What is your self-understanding about what you really are about? And self-regard means, how do you feel about who you are? Your self-worth, your self-esteem. Do you sense value? Do you sense that you're a person of self-worth? And so every single culture has a process of identity formation. Now, very seldom do they ever call it that, but every single culture imposes a process of identity formation on you, and it does it so strongly and so comprehensively that it's invisible to you. You just think, well, this is just the way it is. You don't even see it as a process. You don't think there is any other process, but there always is. Every culture, though, acts as if this is the way to be done. And in order to make our own culture's process more visible, the only way to do that, because it's kind of invisible to us, is to contrast it with other cultures. So it is true that in ancient cultures and in non-Western cultures today, I'm talking about Asia and Latin America and the Middle East and Africa, in ancient cultures and in non-Western cultures today, how was identity formed? Your identity was formed, literally, it was assigned to you, just like here. In other words, in ancient cultures, your identity is assigned to you. And in also non-Western cultures. And it's given to you by your family and by your tribe and by your clan. And you're given roles and you're given responsibilities. And you're told that's who you are. And your self-worth depends on whether you fulfill them. So in a traditional society, who are you? You're a son, you're a daughter. You're a husband, you're a wife. You've got roles, you got responsibilities, and here's how you can feel good about yourself. You sublimate your individual desires for the good of the whole. You work for the honor of your family. You work for the good of your tribe, your clan. And if you do that and you do it well, then you can feel good about yourself. That's an identity. Who are you? You are your roles, your responsibilities in the family, and if you fulfill them sacrificially, you should feel good about yourself. That's your identity, your self-understanding, and your self-regard. But what is Western? In our Western culture turns that whole process on its head. It's exactly the opposite. Robert Bella, the late great sociologist from Berkeley, who wrote that great book, Habits of the Heart, he gave this a kind of technical name, the way we form identity in our culture. He called it expressive individualism. And what he means is this is what he said. In our culture, unlike traditional cultures, in traditional cultures, you sublimate your individual desires for the good of your family. And a lot of you are from both of these, you've lived in both these cultures, you know what I'm talking about. But on the other hand, in modern Western cultures, you never do that. Never, never, never. Right? They may be telling you to be a good girl, right, Elsa? Your family tells you that, but you have to be who you are. In other words, you must assert yourself and your individual desires over against society and over against your family if necessary. So what Robert Biola puts it like this. He says, in expressive individualism, in our modern Western understanding, we believe that every person has a unique core of feeling and intuition that should be unfolded and expressed if your identity is to be realized. So we say in our culture, no one has a right to tell me who I am. I look into my own deepest desires, and I find my desires, and I find my dreams, and that's who I am. And I realize them, and that's how I find my identity. So we believe in our culture, we are utterly self-sufficient. We are not sheep. We are totally self-sufficient. No one can name me. I name myself. No one can tell me who I am. I decide who I am. You know, in one of the old Star Trek: The Next Generation, you know, Patrick Stewart played the captain, Jean-Luc Picard. And I remember there's one little interchange I vaguely remember from years ago, in which he's talking to a young man who wants to go to Starfleet Academy and become whatever they did. I guess become an officer in Starfleet. He wants to go to Starfleet Academy. And so Jean-Luc Picard is looking at him and saying, listen, son, don't do this because your mother wants you to do it. Don't do this because I want you to do it. Do it because you want to do it. Don't try to find your identity in my approval. Don't try to find your identity in your mother's approval. You approve yourself. You decide what is right or wrong for you. That's the essence. That's the essence of the modern Western approach to identity. So let's summarize this, okay? Let's summarize these two approaches. Who are you? In the traditional culture, you are your duties. In modern Western culture, you are your dreams and your desires. In traditional culture, you are your duties and you get your self-worth in the honor that is bestowed upon you by your community if you sacrificially fulfill those duties. But in modern Western culture, you are your inner dreams and desires and you get your self-worth in the dignity you bestow on yourself when you fulfill your dreams and desires and you realize them. And the differences between these two approaches to identity formation are so vast. Let me give you two poems, very different poems. One is 1,000 years old, The Battle of Malden. I'm sure there's lots and lots of people here in Los Angeles who have studied ancient Anglo-Saxon literature and probably know this by heart. So I'm afraid I only know it in modern English. I'm sure many of you know it in Old English. But in the Battle of Malden, it's about this battle, of course. And at the end, the soldiers see that they're losing. The Anglo-Saxon soldiers see that they're losing, and they're going to die. But instead of running, you know, they had the opportunity to run, but instead of running and saving their lives, here's what they say. Brithwold shook his spear of ash, and he calls to his friends, the ones who are still alive, and he says, thought must be harder, hearts be the keener, minds be the greater as our strength lessens. Look, here is our liege lord, all slain. I will not away, but I myself beside my lord so loved a man think to lie. See, that's the older approach to identity. You don't go for your own safety. You don't go for your own interests. You sublimate that to the good of the tribe, to the good of your people, and you die for your people. That's glory. That's honor. That's how I feel good about myself. Now here's another poem written a little bit later. Climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every rainbow, till you find your dream. And if you know, we're laughing of course, but think about the story. Think of how different this is from the Battle of Malden. That is a song being sung to Maria, who's about to renounce her vows as a nun and go out in the world to find herself. She's going to leave the community. She's going to leave, she has to go and find herself. Those are the two different approaches. There's more than that, but basically, those are the two different cultures. Every culture pushes a process of identity formation on you so strongly that you don't even see it as such. You don't think of it as a process. You just think, well, this is just the way it is. But there's always another way. Now, so the modern world says we're not sheep. But point two, we are. And we need someone to name us. Now, for me to make that case over the next couple of minutes, I need to start this way. I'm going to critique the culture that you're living in. And because you live in Los Angeles, you are at the epicenter of this culture. There are other parts of North America and Europe in which is a little bit more of the traditional identity formation approach mixed in. But here in LA, there's like almost none of that, unless you live in a small ethnic enclave. But if you're part of the dominant culture, you know, it's all about climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every rainbow, till you find your dream. You assert yourself over and against what your community tells you, what your society tells you. You don't make sacrifices. Now, what's wrong with that? Before I say what's wrong with that, let me tell you I appreciate the modern Western individualistic approach to identity in many ways. My grandfather was born in Italy, in a small town in Italy, in 1880. Some of you are saying, how old is he? Don't worry, he was like 50 when my mother was born, so you explain. Anyway, now 1880, no, I actually am probably as old as you think I am, but nevertheless, I'm not quite as old as you may think I might be. Anyway, in 1880, my grandfather was born in a small town in Italy, and I forget what his trade was. His father, I think, made pots, if I remember correctly. His father was a craftsman. So as he was growing up, he said to his father, which would be my great-grandfather, he says, you know, I don't want to do this job. I'd like to do something else. And here's what the father, this is 1880 or 1890 or whatever. His father said, wait a minute, this is who we are. This is our family. We make these things. There's only three things you can do. You can be a priest, you can go into the military, or you can work for the family, and that's it. And so I remember my grandfather said, well, what if I went to some other village, some other town, and got a job over there? I said, they would never let you get a job in the other, you know what, they'd hear your family name, they say, you're not from here, you're from over there. You see, my grandfather, what did he do? Well, there really are four things. He could work for his family, he could be a priest, he could go in the military, or he could go to New York City through Ellis Island in 1904 or something like that is when he did. He came to America because we're more of an individualistic culture, and therefore, in the more stratified cultures where you are your duties, you are your responsibility, you are what your family asks you to do, there's like no social mobility. People were locked into very difficult and bad social circumstances, and there was no way out. And I'm glad my grandfather came here. And there is more social mobility and a kind of political individualism, the ability to choose your own government. There's a whole lot of individualisms that are fine, but we're talking now about what Robert Biola calls expressive individualism, where you achieve your very identity, you create your own identity, and you basically bestow it on yourself, and you don't look to anybody else to tell you who you are. That's something else, and there are enormous problems involved with it, in spite of the fact that it's the dominant paradigm. There are enormous problems. I'd like to tell you what those problems are. I'll give it to you under two headings. The approach to identity that your culture is giving you is A, unworkable, and B, crushing. It's unworkable, and because it's unworkable, it's crushing. Let me explain what I mean by unworkable. First of all, an identity that's based not on your duties, but on your inner dreams and desires that you decide you express. First of all, that's unworkable because that kind of identity is incoherent. You know why it's incoherent? Okay. So here's Elsa, and she says, I got to look inside me, I've got to let it go. What? Don't hold it back anymore, let it go. Find what your dreams and desires are and let it go. Here's the problem is, we have equally important and equally strong inner desires that contradict each other. If you try to get your identity out of your deepest desires, here's the problem. Your deepest desires, they contradict each other. For example, you want this career, and you've got this opportunity for this career, and you've always wanted this career, but you also want this relationship. And if you're going to have this relationship, it's going to get in the way of this career. Which is it? And if you say, well, I got to find my deepest desire, oh, for goodness sakes. Do you really think your desires are all harmoniously arranged? You think there's some way to figure out, well, which one is a little hard? You want them both. Francis Spufford, a really funny and great Christian writer, wrote this. He says, he's talking to all of us, he says, you are a being whose wants make no sense, don't harmonize, whose desires deep down are discordantly arranged, so that you truly want to possess and you truly want not to possess at the very same time. You are equipped, you will eventually realize, for farce or even tragedy far more than you are for happy endings. If you say, well, I have to look into my heart and find my deepest desires and dreams, and that's who I am, but who you are is a contradiction, it's incoherent, it's a fool's errand to try to find the deepest desires. They're in there, there are equally strong and important desires, and they contradict each other. You're gonna have to choose. Uh-oh, wait a minute. How would I do that? You're going to have some kind of standard for choosing outside of your feelings. Let's go on. Not only is this approach unworkable because it's incoherent, but it's also an unstable identity. Remember how I said that most people who talk about identity, they always talk about there's two parts. There's self-understanding and self-regard. I mean, who are you? I mean, what are you about, and how do you feel about that? Do you feel good about that or not? Now, if you are a completely different person in every situation, or every year you're a different person, you got no identity. There's got to be some core you that doesn't change, right? Or you don't have an identity. But there is nothing more changeable than feelings. If part of having an identity is to have some core you that doesn't change under pressure, doesn't change no matter what, well, then your feelings are the last place you ought to be going. Your inner desires are the last places you ought to be going. I mean, some of you look old enough for me to ask this question. Aren't there some really strong convictions and desires you had 20 years ago that now you're actually embarrassed about? And it's going to keep on going like that. It's going to keep on going like that. You know, whenever I mean, one of the things I tell younger people, I would say, look, you're 25 years old, right? Do you remember the things that you thought about when you were 18? Yes, if your 25-year-old self thinks of your 18-year-old self as pretty much a jerk. But here's what, it slows down a little bit, but basically your 40-year-old self will think your 25-year-old self is pretty much a jerk. And you know what this means? You're a jerk now. You're a jerk now. Because your feelings are always changing. So an identity based on your inner drives and your inner desires, let it go. Which should I let go? Because if I let them all go, they're going to kill each other, they're my feelings. And besides that, next year I won't be the same person because I won't have the same feelings. But more than that, now listen, here's where I'm going to try to challenge the paradigm. This will be it's going to take some concentration. It's not just that this approach to identity is unworkable because it's incoherent and because it's unstable, but it's also kind of an illusion. That is to say, there really is no identity truly based on your feelings. What we say in our culture is this: I found this desire in me, and that's who I am. What do you mean who I am? Who are you? I am these inner feelings. I can't help them because I have these desires, and that's who I am, and I have to be true to who I am. No, you don't. Let me give you an example. Let's go back to the Battle of Malden, Anglo-Saxon warriors, 1,000 years ago. If an Anglo-Saxon warrior, don't forget these are shaman honor cultures, warrior ethics. 1,000 years ago, an Anglo-Saxon warrior is walking around and he looks into his heart and he sees a very, very strong desire, a really deep impulse, okay? And you know what it is? He just likes to kill people. When people get in his way, he just likes to smash them. He just likes to cut them. He likes to pull out his sword and just cut off their head, okay? So aggression, violent aggression is one of the things he sees in his heart, okay? And what is he going to say about that feeling? He's going to say, that's me. That's who I am. He's going to express that. Why? Because his culture tells him, in a shaman honor culture in which strength is what holds people together, and fear of Fear is really what held that old culture together. He's going to identify and say, that's me, that's who I am. However, if you're walking around LA and you discover, if you're a young man especially, and you discover that one of the deep impulses of your heart is violent aggression, and when people get in your way, you just like to smash them and kill them, well, you will go to prison, or you'll say, I need anger management, I need to go to therapy. In other words, you will squelch that. You will not identify with that. You look at that feeling and you will not say, oh, that's me. You'll say, that's not me, I don't want that to be me. However, let's go back again. Let's just say the Anglo-Saxon warrior discovers a sexual desire in him that doesn't fit in with what his society accepts. What's he going to say? He's going to say, that's not me. He's going to say, well, the aggression is me. That's me. I'll identify with that. I'll express that. But this particular sexual desire, that's not me. I'll have to squelch that. Okay? But today in LA, if you feel aggression, you'll say, that's not me. I'm trying to stay away from that. I'm going to go to therapy. But any sexual desire, you say, that's me. Any sexual desire I have, that's who I really am. But don't you see what's going on? It's your culture telling you which of these feelings is you and which of these feelings is not you. The reality is that all your feelings are you in the sense they're part of you, but none of them have to be you. You don't have to live with any of them. It all depends what you've actually got. Now let's think about this. Your identity is not your feelings. It's a grid that you've brought down on your feelings through which you're sifting and evaluating which feelings are you and which feelings are not you. And where'd that grid come from? Did it come from your culture? Yes. It doesn't have to. I'm going to show you another way to do it. But here's what's so ironic. You think you're being yourself when actually you're being what your culture tells you. Your culture's saying, not that feeling, not that, oh, but sexual desires, you've got to express those because that's who you really are. 1,000 years ago, they would have said, that's crazy. And there's a lot of cultures today in which it's crazy. It's not self-evident that's the case. Nobody actually bases their identity on their inner feelings. They base their identity on their interpretation of their feelings. And they interpret some as being you and some as not being you, and that interpretation comes from a moral, value-laden grid of value judgments that you lay down and by which you automatically are deciding this is something to express, this is something not to express. Where'd that grid come from? If it comes from your culture, are you really free? Or are you really a slave to your culture? I think you're a slave to your culture. So you see, it's unworkable. But then I said, because it's unworkable, it's crushing. I'll be brief about this, but you should know this. Look, traditional culture can be smothering. I told you my grandfather left a traditional culture to come to America because he felt smothered by the fact that he had to do this and that was all he could do. He had to live in this town, that's all he could live in. And I've talked to plenty of people from traditional cultures in which I'm living for the honor of my family, I'm living to please my parents and meet their expectations, and that can be very smothering. I've talked to many a person who would have liked to have been an artist, but their parents want them to go into business to make more money, and they're not very happy. So I'm not saying, oh, the modern Western culture is terrible, let's go back to the traditional culture. I'm going to give you an alternative to all of that. But I have to say, believe it or not, the so-called freedom of our contemporary culture, in which you have to decide who you are, look in your heart, discover what's there, let it go, okay? Express it, become who you want to be. That puts way more pressure on you than traditional culture. Way more pressure. Because once you see what you want to be, then you've got to go achieve it. That's way more pressure than just being a good son or daughter, which is what you got in traditional cultures. What do I mean by that? Well, when you make an identity factor, so for example, let's just say I have an aspiration to be an entrepreneur, to make some new products, to make money, to do this, to do that. Okay, now you've got a career that's not just a good thing, it's your identity. Your career is not just what you do, it is now who you are, and that will drive you into the ground. Because if you have any problem in your career at all, you have no self. It's not just like you've lost money. It's not just like you've had a career reversal. You've lost money. I remember some years ago, I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but I remember some years ago, two guys that I knew, one of who was not a Christian believer, and one of who was a strong Christian believer, and they were both actors, and they were both, like so many actors in New York, out of work. I know it's very different in LA. That's why they come out here. That's why they come out here. They said, there are no actors out of work out in LA. I said, really? Really? I said, just check that out before you move. But anyway, that intel might be a little bit, wrong. However, they were both out of work actors, and they both suddenly got a chance to audition for a really great role. It wasn't the same role, but they had a break, both of them about the same time. And they had an opportunity to get a job that would just break through. They really would. It really meant their career would have taken off. And I remember they both were extremely excited about it, and both of them did not get the job. Both of them lost. And the Christian was devastated for about a week and moved on, and the other guy was devastated for pretty much the rest of his life. And from what I can tell, the difference was the one guy, it was a job and an important thing and part of his identity, but not the most fundamental part of his identity. And the second guy, it was the most fundamental part of his identity. It was the bottom. It was the identity factor. You know how Harold Abrams in Chariots of Fire, he's working, it's the 1920 Olympics, and he's working extraordinarily hard in order to win a gold medal in the 100-yard dash back in the 1920s, I think it was. And at one point, all during the movie, he's never smiling, always kind of grim. And when he wins the gold medal, he still doesn't really smile. And the reason he does that is because, as he says, when that gun goes off, at the beginning of the race, when that gun goes off, he says, I've got 10 seconds to justify my existence. See, he doesn't have 10 seconds to win the gold medal, and it would be a great thing. He has 10 seconds to get a self, to get worth, to get a sense that I'm important. And see, in modern Western culture, you have to have a dream, and then you have to realize that dream. And you know what? It means you've got to be hip. It means you've got to be cool. It means you've got to get into the right school. It means you've got to be successful. It's enormous pressure. It's the reason why Madonna at one point, there's an interesting place where Madonna said this in Vogue magazine. She said, my drive in life is from the fear of being mediocre. That's always pushing me. I push past one spell of it and discover myself as a special human being, but then I feel that I'm still mediocre and uninteresting unless I do something else. Because even though I think I've become somebody, I still have to prove that I'm somebody. My struggle has never ended, and it probably never will. Let me give you another example. This isn't a famous person, but a guy some years ago, just about 3 years ago, in the New York Times was writing about why he got out of, he was a writer. He was a novelist. And he explained why he left. He just left the job. He stopped writing. And here's what he said. When good writing, now listen carefully, this is extraordinarily insightful. When good writing was my only goal, I made the quality of my work the measure of my worth. As expressive individualism, I made the quality of my work the measure of my worth. Not just the quality of my work, the quality of my work, the quality of my work, the measure of my worth. It wasn't just what I did, it was who I was. And he says, for this reason, I wasn't able to read my own writing. I couldn't tell whether something I had just written was good or bad because I needed for it to be good in order to feel sane. I lost the ability to cheerfully interrogate how much I liked what I had written to see what was actually on the page rather than what I wanted to see or what I feared to see. Isn't that interesting? He said what happened was he basically couldn't work, and the reason he couldn't work was because he says when I made the measure of my work, the quality of my work, the measure of my worth, I could no longer, I had to be good. If somebody said, oh, this is kind of crappy, that's disappointing. Not if the quality of your work is the measure of your worth. Not if your identity is based in your career. Then when somebody says this is crap, like you have no self left, you're just having a total meltdown. Whatever you live for, really live for, whatever you really base your significance on, That's going to drive you into the ground because it becomes an identity factor, and you've got to have it. And you can't admit the truth, even when things are going bad. Now, what's interesting about this guy, he said he finally decided, I can't write. And he said, I realized I was finding my meaning in my work. So you know what he does? He actually says, instead, I went out and got a girlfriend. Oh, that'll solve everything. Thank goodness. I can't believe that was a narrow escape on his part, don't you think? Because, except I have a book for him to read. Ernest Becker, who is not many people know about him. He died young, but he wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning book in the 1970s called The Denial of Death. He was a secular man. He did not believe in God at all. But he understood that if you don't believe in God, you have to find your identity either in your family, like tradition, or in the West, you have to find your identity in career or love and romance or something. And he says, if you start to look at a person in a love relationship, and you start to actually not just desire that person and desire that person's love, but you need that person to love you to feel good about yourself. If your identity starts to get based in that person's love, watch out. Watch out. And here's what he says. He says, the self-glorification that we secular people, he's talking about people who have to find an identity, not in God, not in family, not in, they have to achieve it themselves. He says, the self-glorification we need in our innermost being, we now look for in the love partner. And what is it that we want when we elevate the love partner to this position? We want to be rid of our faults, of our feeling of nothingness. We want to be justified. We want to know our existence has not been in vain. We want redemption from this person, nothing less. And then he adds, needless to say, no human love partner can give us this. And that's true. Remember how I said this writer, when he made the quality of his work the measure of his worth, he couldn't stand the idea that maybe this wasn't a good piece of work. He couldn't take it. But if the most important thing in your life is a love partner, if you actually believe literally what all those songs say, you're nobody till somebody loves you. Without you, baby, what good am I? That's cosmic language. We can, it looks ha-ha, but it's cosmic language. And if you get to the place where you're looking at another person and that person, if you love me, then I feel good about myself. If you don't love me, then I don't. You can kiss that relationship goodbye. Eventually, you're going to kill each other. You will never be able to criticize that person, even if that person needs criticism, because if they get angry at you, you won't be able to take it. Because they're not, it's not just their love, it's almost a kind of salvation. Or if they criticize you, you won't be able to take that. And it'll be a mess of a dysfunctional relationship. And you see where we are? Here's the irony. I'm going to give you two ironies right now. The first irony is your culture we are the first culture that says you decide who you are. You don't look to your family, you don't look to God, you don't look to the nation. You decide who you are, which sounds free, doesn't it? In fact, isn't that what she says? She says it's time to test the limits and break through. No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. So it seems free. And yet, you are more chained to what other people think. You're chained to your love partner. You're chained to what people think of your writing, whatever it is. Why do you think we spend so much money on clothing? We spend money on clothing in a way we don't in traditional cultures. You know why? Because we're creating a self with our clothing, with our consumer goods. We're creating an idealized self. We are slaves. And here's what we get. The irony is we are more slaves in this culture where we're told you're free to decide who you want to be than any other culture on earth. And it also means it's a lie. We can't bless ourselves. We can't name ourselves. We can't possibly just say, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. All that matters is what I think. You don't mean that. Nobody can live like that. You desperately want something from outside to come in and affirm you. That's why, put it this way, the praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards. The praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards. You need praise from someone that you adore, or you won't have a self. You have to have someone come and name you. Someone from outside has to bless you, validate you, affirm you, somebody. But we see that if it's a human being or if it's a human group of beings, it's deadly. Isak Dinesen in Out of Africa, she sums it up perfectly. She says, pride, true pride, is faith in the idea that God had when he made you. Now, most people are not aware of any idea God had in the making of them, and sometimes they make you doubt that there has ever been much of an idea, or else it has been lost, and who will find it again? They have to accept as success what others warrant to be so, and to take their happiness, even their own selves, at the quotation of the day. Since I so flubbed up that quotation, let me read you the last sentence again. They have got to accept as success what others warrant to be so, and to take their happiness, even their own selves, at the quotation of the day. So that's the first irony. The first irony is that we are more beholden to other people. We are more the slaves of our careers. We're the slaves of our looks. In other words, it's nice to be thin. It feels good. It's better for your health. But if being thin is your identity, and you put on some pounds, you have a self-quake. It's nice to make money. It's nice to have a career. It's whatever it is. It's nice to be in love. But when those things become identity factors, and you're trying to get your very self-worth from them, they will destroy you. And here's the other irony. The other irony is we think that we're a guilt-free country. I mean, the Bullets Over Broadway, the Woody Allen movie some years ago? Rob Reiner is playing an artist, and at one point, this is my favorite line from Rob Reiner. He looks at Woody Allen and he says, "Guilt is petty bourgeois crap. An artist creates his own moral universe." And what he's saying is, you can't lay a guilt trip on me. I decide what is right or wrong for me. I decide who I am. You can't tell me how to live my life. Everybody decides what is right or wrong for them. And if that's the case, and that's the rhetoric, that's out there all over the place. If that's the case, you know what that means? It means nobody should be feeling guilty about anything. And yet we do. And yet we do. Because see, we're under pressure to live up to our dream. We're under pressure to live up. We desperately need people to think we're a good writer, desperately need people to think we're a good actor. We desperately need to have somebody fall in love with us. We need these things in a way that our ancestors wanted them but didn't need them. They weren't their identity. They weren't crushed by these things. And even though we say we don't believe in guilt, we know we're not living up. Put it this way, we don't believe in hell, we don't believe in sin, we say, and yet we have a sense of condemnation that we can't shake. There's a voice, isn't there, that tells you you're an imposter. You know it, that you're nowhere near as good as you want people to think you are. There's a voice that calls you an imposter, calls you a fraud, calls you a coward, calls you a fool, calls you, says you're not living up. No, nobody can make us feel guilty, and yet we have a sense of condemnation we can't shake. And we feel stained. We feel like Lady Macbeth. Remember the spots on her hands that she couldn't seem to get out? She felt stained. She felt guilty, but she didn't have see, we don't even have a word for it. So the great irony is we do have that sense of condemnation. We do sense we're cursed. We are under this crushing burden. We need someone from outside to tell us we're okay, but if it's a human being, it'll drive us into the ground and we'll become a slave to those human beings or that human being. What is the answer? Here's the answer. In 1 Corinthians 3 and 4, Paul is talking to the Corinthians, and he makes a very interesting statement that I'm going to read to you. He says this, listen carefully. He says, "I care very little if I'm judged by you or by any human court. Indeed, I don't even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that doesn't make me innocent. It's the Lord who judges me." Whoa, let me break that down for you. There's three things. First of all, he says, I don't care what you think about me. I don't care what any human court thinks about me. Good, you say. You know, we're modern Western people. We say, great. The traditional view of identity is that you get your identity from what your clan says, what your tribe, what your family says, what your parents say. And Paul's saying, I don't care what you think. I don't care. You say, great. But then the next thing he says is, I don't care what I think. What? And then he says something brilliant. He says, my conscience is clear. That does not make me innocent. See, he says, I'm not going to go on my inner feelings. Have you ever read the transcriptions of war criminals from like after World War II or any other? They don't feel guilty. You know, I know Jiminy Cricket, didn't he grow up in New York, in Los Angeles too? But Jiminy Cricket said, always let your conscience be your guide. Well, the Nazis did that, and look where it got them. Your inner feelings are not good. They're quicksand. They're not reliable. So he says, I don't care what you think, but I don't even care what I think. My conscience is clear. That does not make me innocent. I don't get my self-esteem by what you think of me, but I don't get it from what I think of me. And then he says, it's the Lord that judges me. And you say, what? How could he enjoy that idea? The Lord judging me? I mean, it's bad enough that my writing isn't good. It's bad enough that I've gained weight. But if God looking at me, and why would he go there? Here's why he goes there. What I'm about to tell you is not something that you're going to possibly be able to, I can't unpack this in the next 2 minutes, but I'm going to try. But what I'm going to say is suggesting. I hope it's going to pique your interest. I hope it's going to get you to explore. There's no way you can possibly grasp what I'm about to tell you in the next 2 minutes sufficiently. But I want you to know the secret of your future, the secret of your whole life are locked in what I'm about to tell you. It's Galatians chapter 3, verses 13 and 14. Listen. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. He redeemed us so that by faith we might receive the promised blessing by faith. I'll say it again. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. He redeemed us so that by faith we might receive the promised blessing by faith. What's he talking about? Okay, what's the curse of the law? Even in our modern relativistic culture, I just showed you, we all have a sense of condemnation. We know we're not living up. We're under great pressure. And so we know that voice, that sense of being stained, that voice that condemns us. We know, even in our modern culture where we supposedly don't let anybody put us on guilt trips, we know that voice, that sense of condemnation, that curse of the law. And here's what we're being told. Jesus Christ became a curse for us when he went to the cross so that the blessing he earned comes to us by faith. What? Well, there's 2 ways to fulfill a law. Here's the law of the stop sign. I have no idea what the fine is in Los Angeles, but I'll just tell you what it is in New York. Here's the law of the stop sign. There's 2 ways to satisfy the stop sign law. What? Number 1, stop. If you stop, full stop, and then you go on, the law has no claim on you. You fulfilled it. The other thing you do is if you go through the stop sign, you pay the fine, which I think in New York State is $110. So there's 2 ways to fulfill the law. One is obey it, and one is pay the penalty. Jesus Christ came to earth, and he was the only human being in history who loved God with all his heart, all his soul, all his strength, all his might, and his neighbor as himself. He completely fulfilled the law. He was the only human being that didn't deserve the voice, the sense of condemnation, the curse. He's the only one that fulfilled the law completely. But then, at the end of his life, instead of taking the blessing that he deserved, he went to the cross and paid the penalty for not loving his neighbor as himself, for not loving God. He took the penalty that we deserved. And what that means is when you say, Father, accept me, love me, adopt me into your family, put your name on me, your family name. Not because of what I've done or what I could do or what I ever will do, but because of what Jesus Christ has done. At that moment, your curse is transferred to him, and his blessing, the blessing that he deserves, falls on you. And what that means is you have the only identity on the face of the earth that is not achieved but received. Every other identity, traditional, Western, religious, most religious people are saying, if I live a good enough life, then God will take me into heaven. That's an achieved identity. That means it's based on your performance. You're being crushed by that. Religious performance or artistic performance, you're going to be crushed. Only Christianity gives you an identity which is received, not achieved. Not based on your performance, based on His. And the minute that you the minute you say, Father, accept me because of what Jesus Christ has said, I'm sorry, I'm not leaving time for that. I appreciate it, but listen, I mean, by the way, this is life and death stuff. This is life and death stuff. The minute you say, Father, accept me because of what Jesus Christ has said, the only person whose opinion in the universe, the only person whose opinion counts in the whole universe, God, looks at you in Jesus Christ and sees you as more precious than all the jewels that lie beneath the earth. The verdict is in. The trial is over. You're not living your entire life hoping that maybe somehow you'll perform well enough and God will bring you in. That's not how Christianity works at all. And you know why that's possible? The Bible says in Philippians 2 that Jesus Christ, who was in heaven, who was perfect, who had glory, He emptied Himself of His glory and made Himself of no reputation. Meaning, He lost His good name so that you could have a name that lived forever. A name that lives forever. And last thing, remember Lady Macbeth? There's no place, I think, in literature that's more poignant about the sense of being stained and having a sense of condemnation and not being good enough and not living up than Lady Macbeth. She's sleepwalking at night and she sees blood on her hands. It's a hallucination, but it's her guilt. And she says, out, damn spot. Oh, all the perfume, not all the perfume in Arabia can sweeten this little hand. She's gone around the bend because of a feeling of being stained. Who can get the stain out? Who can get rid of that sense of condemnation? Who can get that sense of curse taken away from you? There's a fairy tale, an old Scottish fairy tale called The Black Bull of Norroway. And it's a fascinating story. It's about a prince in a kingdom who goes to battle and he kills someone he regrets killing. He kills someone that he's sorry he killed. He feels terrible. He feels guilty. He feels great regret. And he comes home and he takes off his tunic, which has blood on it, and when he tries to wash it off, the blood won't come off. It's a symbol of a feeling like I'm not good enough, I'm not right, I'm not what I should be. And he made a decree, and he declared through his kingdom that any young woman who could wash the stain out of his tunic would be his queen, would be his true love. And by the way, that is true. By the way, it is true that there are people that can come into your life and reprogram your self-image in major ways. I married a person who did that for me, and yet no human being. The praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards. What you need to be adored by someone you adore, but if it's only a human being, you'll destroy each other because you'll turn each other into saviors, and no human being can be a savior. But here's how the fairy tale goes. There's a Cinderella type girl. There's a little servant girl, kind of a slave almost, who works for this family, and she doesn't know about the decree. And one night she comes upstairs and notices a lot of laundry that needs to be done. So she does all the laundry, including this kind of nice looking tunic, which has got blood on it, and she washes it and it comes out. The next morning, the wicked, nasty mother, who's sort of the head of the home, comes down, sees what happened, realizes what happened, and grabs her daughter and the tunic and goes off to the castle and says to the prince, "My daughter washed out the stain, and so you need to marry her." And the prince, the way the story goes, the prince looks at this girl and says, "Yeah, but something's not right here." And the way the story eventually comes is he discovers the servant girl, the humble servant girl, who had the power to get the stain out. And anyone who gets the stain out, anyone who can really, really make you finally know who you are, get rid of that sense of condemnation, get rid of all that, is your true love. And they find each other. Look, at Jesus Christ can get the stain out. He is your true love. But he went to the cross to do it. He was cast out so that you could be brought in. He became a nobody so that you could have a name that lasts forever. He lost the Father's love so that you could have the Father's love. He was cast out so that you could be brought in and made an adopted child of God. That's your identity. And that's like an identity like no other identity on the face of the earth. Go get it. And by the way, I know there's people out there who say, oh, I'm a professing Christian, but you know what? I don't think I have actually lived into that identity myself. No, you probably haven't. Go get it. Let us pray.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.